Joined now by the former Pakistan Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto, from Los Angeles by the scholar Reza Aslan, who's written extensively about an Islamic Reformation, Maryam Namazie, who is a former Muslim, and from Lebanon by Omar Bakri Mohammed, who during his 20 years living in Britain was regarded as a spiritual leader of various Islamist organizations, including Al-Muhajirun. He was banned from returning to Britain in 2005. Benazir Bhutto, first of all, we've heard all kinds of characterizations about Islam tonight, very, very different ones. Do you recognize Islam in crisis, or at least in a degree of ferment now?
I feel that the Muslim world is going through something that Europe went through earlier, which is the discussion on the role of the state in religious affairs. There are some people who would like the state to make laws that are in accordance with Islam, and there are others who say that God should judge an individual. So there's a struggle, one can say, between the church and the state.
Reza Aslan, you've written extensively, as I said, about an Islamic Reformation. What would you mean by that?
Well, it's a little bit like Ms. Bhutto just mentioned. You know, when we use the term Reformation, we have to define it. What we're talking about here is an internal struggle between institutions and individuals over who has the authority to define faith. This is a phenomenon that has occurred in all great religious traditions, and it's one that's been taking place within the Muslim world for most of the last century, quite frankly. We're seeing a rapid sense of individualization taking place throughout the Islamic world as Muslims begin to start thinking of themselves less as members of a worldwide community of faith and more as individual members of nation states. And that's created not so much a crisis within Islam, but a crisis within Islamic authority. I think that with the rise of the internet and the widespread access to education and new theories and ideas, more and more individuals are taking upon themselves the authority that has been in the hands of the ulama for some 14 centuries to define Islam for themselves.
Right. Maryam Namazie, have you kind of opted out of this in the sense that you've rejected the religion? You're not taking part fully in that debate then, presumably?
Well, I mean, yes, I've opted out of religion because I think it's important to have freedom of religion as well as from religion. But I think that regardless, this is an issue for everybody, whether they consider themselves Muslims or not. I think what we need is not an Islamic Reformation, though any sort of reform is welcome, though I think is not possible. We need an enlightenment. And I think as with Christianity and the effort to push it into the private sphere, we need to ensure that Islam, however many people want to believe in it, that's of course their right, but that it is a private matter and one that is completely separate from the state and the educational system.
Omar Bakri Mohammed joining us from Beirut. When so many Muslims have written to this program, for example, saying Islam is of course a religion of peace, do you have any regret for some of the things which you have said, which are clearly motivated by hatred?
First of all, we must agreed here now that we are talking about a complete civilization called the Islamic civilization. And the golden age of Islam was in the time of the Caliphate. So Islam is not something we need to try. Islam was implemented for 1300 years and was the most successful system ever the mankind has really lived under, whereas Muslim and non-Muslims was living together. Muslim, Jews, Christian, Hindus was living together under the last Caliphate, the Ottoman Caliphate. Unfortunately, that is the crisis, the absence of the Islamic State. Islam is a rational belief, emanates from that complete system of life.
But forgive me for interrupting, but
there's a conflict. There's no doubt there's a conflict between Islam and non-Islam.
If you want Muslims and non-Muslims to live together, how does it help that when you say that London bombers who killed 52 people would go to paradise, the whole of Britain is a land of war, the non-believer has no sanctity for their own life or property? These are things which many Muslims and certainly non-Muslims find very offensive.
You see, all this is the stereotype of the Western media. Nobody said that. I think if I ever said that in the UK, I could myself be arrested. We was living in the UK, not in Zimbabwe. There's law and order.
You didn't say anything.
I've never been convicted in anything. Never. I was the first one to condemn the killing of innocent people, and I said we condemn the killing of innocent people in America, in Britain, in Spain, and I wish from you to condemn the killing of innocent people by the American British forces in Iraq, in Afghanistan. We always said that.
Okay.
I think it's about time for the Western society to reform themselves to adopt existing of Islam.
Okay.
I think a clear example is the fact that when you have debates with Islamists, you know, they change their opinions and say, well, we don't agree with the killing of innocent people. But if you press further, the question is who is deemed innocent, and you'll find that not many people are actually deemed to be innocent. But I think the point is that this is not a Muslim issue, and I think it's a mistake to say that. A majority of people who might either label themselves as Muslim or are being unfairly labeled as Muslims, because people have thousands of characteristics, but there's a focus on this. It's not a Muslim issue. It's not. The terrorism that we're faced with is not a Muslim terrorism. It's the work of Islamists, and it's not a fringe group. It's a very strong political movement which has state power in Iran and is implementing Sharia law in many countries.
I want to bring in Omar Bakri Mohammed again on this. I mean, do you think that the world that you would like to see can coexist with Western liberal democracies?
I believe it's about time now for the Western liberal democracy is to grow up and to realize there's another people living in this planet Earth. I think we are suffering from secular fundamentalism, which is rejecting the other and use violence against them. You reject the views of the Muslims and you use the violence in the name of the law and international community and so-called war against terrorism. I think it's about time we could coexist together, no compulsion in religion, nobody force upon anybody to embrace Islam, because Islam is about conviction, not about we force people to embrace it. And I agree really with some of what we said, that there is some problem between Islam and the West, and about time for the Western people and for the Western power to reform themselves, to realize that there is another people living there, and Islam the fastest growing religion in the world, and the Islamists, you call them extremists, they are not extremists, they are maybe extreme from the man-made system, but they are not extreme from the divine text. They don't believe in killing anybody.
But there are some extremists
Yes, there is some element.
who believe
there is
that
some
they must
element
kill
among
anybody.
the secular society.
There are people who believe that they must...
Let me bring in Benazir Bhutto.
I believe there are some extremists. I'm seeing this in my country.
I
they say we must kill people who do not agree with us. We must kill people randomly. We should go to a bazaar or a marketplace and kill innocents there. The Prophet of Islam said you cannot kill innocent people even in a just war. But they believe in killing innocents. This has come from the Muslim Brotherhood. It has come from the Afghan jihad that was fought in the 80s. And these people have a political agenda. I want to differentiate
Bhutto, you are making...
Let me just comment one thing. You cut me off. Let me just complete. That is wrong. I agree with you. If there is element like this who want to kill people just for the sake of it, that is completely wrong. The way we disagree about the American to bomb any place in Iraq and kill people innocent in Iraq and Afghanistan. Two wrong doesn't make right. All what we are saying, we could coexist together. We could live together. When I was in Britain, I was the cause for stability. I was able to control the Muslim youth. Yes, I have radical views, but my radical views did never ever let anybody to commit any crime or even to
I want to bring in Maryam Namazie again.
I mean, I think we don't live in another planet where we can't see the effects of political Islam in the world today. I have a problem with an East-West demarcation, which is being often indicated. I think the reality is that the biggest victims, and victims for many decades, not just since September 11th or July 7th, have been people who live in Iran, in Iraq, in Afghanistan by this political Islamic movement.
In other words, Muslim people themselves.
Or people who don't consider themselves Muslim or are labeled as Muslim, just as in Britain there are people with 1 million characteristics. But just to give you an example, that still in the 21st century, Islamic Sharia law in Iran, for example, allows for people to still be stoned to death. They hang people on cranes, via cranes, for having for acts incompatible with chastity. So to say that, you know, we'd like to live alongside with everybody else, or to say that he represents a so-called Islamic world, which he doesn't. He is as despised as his views and his movement as despised as U.S. militarism and the state terrorism that we're seeing in Iraq and Afghanistan as well.